To continue, what I want to go over is some of the stretching commands, and the stretch command can be found up in your modify ribbon up in your tool menu up here, and that's where the tool button is for it. And what stretch does is it allows you to stretch an object or objects either to a distance or to another object. And what this is particularly helpful for is that when you start to do surveys and when you start to draw up plans, what you'll find is that a lot of times, you might be short a dimension, rather than something, being 2 foot, let's say 6, for example, it really needs to be 3 foot 6. So what you can do is, rather than moving the objects and creating what could potentially be a little bit more work, what you could do instead is you can take a series of objects and you can stretch them that foot. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase these objects, okay? And I'm going to draw a rectangle that's, let's say, 10 feet, and I do the tab method 10 feet, enter. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset this by 6 inches to the inside. Okay, it doesn't really matter for this example, and hit escape. And what this essentially does is this represents, the exterior walls of a space. So the stretch command, it works a little bit differently in how you select the objects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in S for stretch, and it's going to ask me to select my objects. Now if I select all of my objects, okay, which is the most logical thing when we start to work with AutoCAD's language, and I hit enter to get into the next phase of the command, it's going to ask me to specify a base point. So you should be getting used to this language that AutoCAD is, using and asking you how to continue on with the command. I'm going to specify a base point. Okay, so I'm just going to click, and you'll see that what happens is that actually when I go to specify a second point, it moves it. Okay, and this is because it's a little bit tricky in the way that this command works, but what you select when you stretch is what you want to stretch. So for example, if I type in S again, okay, or you can do just hit enter again to redo that last command. What I'm going to do this time is, rather than selecting the whole thing, okay, and for this you have to use the green selection box. Okay, the blue selection box is not going to work, and clicking on it's not going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and I'm going to get my green selection box, and I'm only going to select this portion. Okay, because what that does is that basically tells AutoCAD that only that portion is being stretched. So that now, once I do that, I can hit enter. I can specify my base point, so I'll specify, for example, this endpoint, and snap to the endpoint. And then if I have my ortho on, okay, it's going to make it more accurate. I can type in 1 foot and hit enter. And what it's going to do is it's going to stretch that 1 foot. Okay. Really, really super helpful. As I said, especially if you're making plan changes. Now what happens also is if I have, let's say, a piece of furniture, so I'm just going to represent that by this rectangle. Again, it depends on where you select it. So if I type in S for stretch again, hit enter, and select all of it encompassing that, representation of the piece of furniture. Okay, select that, hit enter, click on my base point, and stretch it. Okay, you'll see that because this is encompassed, okay, it went with it, as opposed to if I hit stretch again, select only a portion of that piece of furniture, select my endpoint, and stretch it, you'll see that it does the same thing with a piece of furniture. So if you are starting to work with furniture, okay, and I just hit undo a couple times, then what you can do is I can use my stretch tool, I can encompass that piece of furniture, select my base point, and stretch it. Or if I want to stretch this wall and not the piece of furniture, okay, this is where your deselection of objects comes into play. I can type in stretch, I can select this whole area, I can hold down shift, click on that rectangle to deselect it, and now I can stretch it without having to move the piece of furniture. So again, it kind of depends on the task and how you want to work with it, but the stretch command is a very, very good command. What you can also do is if I have, let's say, a vertical construction line, so XL for construction line, V to constrain it to the vertical, and I'm going to set it off into the distance, okay? If I don't have a specific, you can either stretch it arbitrarily from that base point, or you can type in the command as I did with that 1 foot. But what I can also do is, if I don't want to go by a measurement or anything like that, I can use my stretch and snap to an object in order to snap this portion to this object. Okay, to do that, I'm going to type in S for stretch, select that edge, okay, hit enter to go into the next phase. I'm going to select my endpoint, okay, snap on my endpoint, and then I'm going to either bring it perpendicular to the construction line that I just created, or if I bring it close enough, and you'll see that, you know, there's a lot of the nearest snapping. If, again, I just type in PER, it's going to automatically recognize the perpendicular. I can hit enter, and it's going to snap it, okay, right onto that construction line, and I can get rid of that construction line. Now, what you'll also notice is that when you start to work with objects, okay, when I do select them, these blue boxes come up, okay, and there's a little small blue rectangle in the middle too as well. These are your grips, and what we can do is we can actually work with these grips and we can stretch an object. Now, the rectangle, okay, is going to have different grips than, for example, the circle, okay, and other types of, you know, this is the line tool. That's pretty similar to the rectangle, but the way that these work is that they work a little bit differently from each other, okay, in terms of the grips and what types of grips they are. And you'll see that there's a difference between the small rectangle and the square grip. Now, essentially, if I take my circle, okay, this one in the middle, whenever you see the one directly in the middle, that means that if you click on it, it's going to basically snap to that object and you can move the object. Okay, so that's what that middle one is for. You'll also see that when I select my line, it's the same thing in the line. Okay, but what I can do with these grips is that if I ever need to change the, you know, for example, the diameter of this, okay, I can click on one of these grips, I can stretch it up, okay, so we can say 2 feet. And what that does is if I do a distance from the center, okay, so I'm going to snap to the center to this, what it does is at 2 feet, it makes it 2 feet, okay, rather than stretching it, you know, for example, 2 feet like we would with the stretch command. So if I stretch this 2 feet in that direction, that actually stretches it 2 feet. This one actually makes it to 2 feet, and you can double check that by using the distance tool. Okay, I always mouse over the edge of my circle in order to activate the center, or you can type in CEN, okay, in order to snap to it. I'm going to click on that center point. I'm going to bring it up, you know, to essentially the nearest point, or you can type in PER for perpendicular, and it'll tell you that that's 2 feet. Okay, so that's how you know that the radius is 2 feet and has a 4-foot diameter. But essentially what that snap does is it's affecting that radius, which in turn is going to stretch the whole circle to the dimension that you give it. Okay, now what there also is, I'm just going to get rid of this guy to save some space. This same thing, you can click on any of these tools and you can move them and you can stretch them that way. What I want to do now is I want to show you some of the other options that we have with the snaps. Now, especially when you have a polyline, okay, or a rectangle, what you'll notice is that you actually have these little extra grips in the middle. And this is a new feature that was added in 2011. And what this does is it adds a few options to your rectangle, and actually they're really, really helpful, because a lot of times what happens is that you'll find that, okay, well, I have a rectangle, but I need to actually make it into a custom shape. Okay, and before, the way that you would have to do that is you would have to actually redraw the shape. Okay, or what you would do is you do it in a series of lines, and then you would, you know, essentially, if it was a series of lines, okay, what you would do is you would take all of the lines, you would do the p-edit command, okay, select a polyline, turn it into 1, and then join them like we did before. Okay, and then basically what these grips do is you can always stretch those that way, okay, but you can do the same thing as a polyline. But if you're starting off with a rectangle, what this allows you to do is, if I select it, this middle grip has a bunch of options. So one is stretch, okay, which is what the grip does anyways. Okay, so I can stretch it. But what I can do is I can add a vertex. So I can make those custom shapes by adding a vertex. Okay, and all I'm doing is mousing over that grip, getting my options, and selecting add a vertex. You know, I can snap these grips to points on another object. And then what I can also do is I can actually add an arc. So I can convert this to an arc if I want a rounded, you know, portion to the object that I'm creating, or the, you know, the shape that I'm creating. So you have a few options like that. And then once you do create the arc, what you can also do is you can convert it back to a line, okay? And you'll see that the other options are, you know, what we already went through, the add vertex and the stretch. What we can also do is, you'll see that when we first start off, okay, we have by default our object snap tracking is on. And that's also activated by hitting the F11 key. And what this does is, if this is on, okay, if I take one of these grips and I want to line up this edge, okay, with this grip, okay, what I can do is I can actually click on that grip to snap it, and I can move it down, and essentially I can mouse over that other grip, move it across, and you'll see that what pops up, okay, and it takes a little bit of finagling to do, but what pops up is this green dashed line, and that's how you know that you're actually on the same axis, okay, on the same line as this snap, okay. Once I have that, I can click and it'll snap it down to that line, and this is going to be a straight line. Now what I can also do is, it's a little bit easier, not easier to work with, but it's a little bit more fluid to work with when it's when you don't have your ortho on. So if I turn off my ortho, okay, and I want to line up this edge with this edge, okay, or this point with this point, what I can do is I can essentially mouse over, and in this, you know, whether or not it's easier with your ortho on is you need to get a little bit used to it. But for this example, what you can see is that I can mouse over this endpoint, okay, and bring it down. See, the green line is attached to it now. And then I can mouse over this endpoint and bring it across. And when I get to that point, you'll see that it essentially shows an X where the crosshairs of these two green lines are going to be. And I can click it and it'll snap it so that it's in line with this edge and it's in line with that edge.